person, even if you're not speaking, are very important. Even if you're townsperson
Someone
number
is always
23.
looking at you.
Yes, and they might be right now, because I think we have now gone live. So
Oh, my
there probably
goodness.
are people looking
Wow.
at
There's
us
people
about
watching.
this time. Yes, absolutely. And good afternoon to everyone who's tuning in right now on Facebook to join us for our weekly live Q&A session with our lead pastor, Shane Schlesman. Senior pastor came to mind because if you're familiar with a particular face, then you know we've got a former senior pastor here, so forth. And another special guest, our pastor of media and fine arts, Bob Laughlin, is joining us this week. So this is an extra special week, guys. Thanks so much.
Big
for joining
time.
us.
This is like extravaganza sweeps week.
Yes, absolutely.
Big time.
So I feel like we should do some sort of public service announcement to all viewers that they may have gut-wrenching laughter experience during this session and so forth.
It won't happen unless Shane provides it.
Okay.
Yes, that'll happen. You're about to be introduced to someone who's never been on Facebook his whole life, he can honestly say. And Bob, who's a much younger old guy than John, who is very familiar with social media.
Yes.
So we're going to have a really unusual and good mix of responses here, I think.
I'm enjoying it already.
It's yet
That
to
is
be
great.
seen.
That is great. And we are intending, of course, as always, to delve deeper into this past week's sermon, which was sort of a tag team sermon, if you were able to catch it, between Shane and John. And actually, Bob, you were the subject of much of that as well, much of that sermon.
Just a little uncomfortable,
Because you didn't get to go up on stage and say anything about yourself.
Well, I offered the opportunity.
You did.
Yeah.
You did.
You took advantage of your mother as a prop, too. That's all you did, was you just were there like that with her
That
the
was
whole
so
time.
sweet.
Yeah,
that
it
was
was.
very
Take care of Mama.
awesome.
It's
And so if you happen to have missed that sermon, we do invite you to go ahead and watch it. It's available for viewing on demand on both Facebook and YouTube. So we do want to delve into this past week's sermon a bit, in which we were talking about the longevity, the impact of lifelong leadership, right? So that's going to be our topic for our questions today. And we do have some prepared questions, as always, but of course we would love to hear what your questions. This is your opportunity to ask any of these gentlemen about lifelong learning and lifelong leadership. So we do invite you to use the comments here to go ahead and ask your questions. And we'll have a slightly extended time live today, so we have an opportunity to get your question in. So gentlemen, to get us started, let's go rolling with this question here. We'll focus on lifelong learning for a little bit. In what ways have you experienced unconventional learning that has had a major impact on your thinking and work? And by unconventional, I'm kind of thinking of more like non-academic, non-structured. So just to give you an example, one thing that I use is I have a membership to masterclass.com, where I'm able to learn from people like Hans Zimmer and Aaron Sorkin on how to compose music or storytell. So that's a bit unconventional. So
Did you just hear that he's learning how
That
to
is
compose
way more
music?
interesting than anything
no, don't get any ideas. I'm not composing any music, Bob.
That's amazing, Jim. You do everything.
But it's about storytelling, ultimately, even when you're writing music.
It is.
Storytelling. So any of you have any response to unconventional learning that has made a major impact in your life?
Well, it's not really as unconventional as perhaps you're hoping for.
Okay.
But honestly, reading outside of the normal dots of my life, a lot of ministers read theological books and commentaries, and but I have found the richest illustrations. I know there might not have been that many of them, but the times when there were illustrations that really clicked, honestly came from a lot of the secular reading that I was doing, from the minds of people who weren't necessarily geared exactly toward the same things that I was. And so that's really been a major part of my ministry. And now in retirement, I read more than I ever have.
Nice. Very good. Any other thoughts on that?
Honestly, we hear a lot about what people are reading, and there's great stuff out there. You can find out about any subject matter you need to. I mean, Google, all you got to do is, or go to Wikipedia. You can get information, but I love to look in the places that most people don't look, because you can really kind of, it triggers my creativity, honestly, to look at what people are not doing. and and just people watching. I just love to watch people. I love to watch children, and I learn so much in unconventional ways just by watching little children and how they interact. I just love the kids here at church, and it's amazing the kind of things you can learn from them.
It's because you're so young at heart.
ABCs, yeah.
Yeah, young at heart.
All
Do you
kinds
ever
of things.
go to look up something on Wikipedia and you find yourself an hour later, you've clicked through 20 different things because one story leads to another?
Well, I find myself doing that. I'll look something up on Wikipedia, and then a day later, I hear Shane mention it in a sermon.
That's a big source of mine, yeah.
Wikipedia.
That's not fair. Shane's preaching has really been dynamic.
Yes.
I love sitting up in the gallery where I sit and being ministered to. I really do.
That is great. Another question I have for you gentlemen is, who is perhaps a non-WEAG, because if it was WEAG, that'd be cheating, a non-WEAG public figure that has been instrumental in your learning process?
Would you repeat that question, Jim?
Should rule out family, too. That's also cheating, I think. A non-WEAG public figure who has been instrumental in your learning process. Doesn't have to be
Obviously,
a public
it's
figure that
wide
everyone
open, so if
knows.
you'd like to be a non-WEAG public figure to have an influence in Bob's life, he's saying he's open.
He's
Hey, I am
seeking
very
one.
open
He's
to
looking
that.
for.
Send in your
Looking for
comments now.
He's taking applications.
I mean, our parents, I know John and I have been together a lot, but our parents had profound influence on us, especially our longevity in being in a local church. They had big impact on us, and my parents were huge in my understanding of what it meant to be a part of a church, part of the family of God, and what it meant to follow after Christ. And, when you live with that every day and it gets instilled in you, it's not a great preacher that preaches the greatest sermons for you. It's oftentimes people you're with every day.
Sure.
I know
Yeah.
this congregation has heard this with mesmerizing frequency from me, but a plaque that my mother had that she deliberately hung in key places where I hung out as a kid, whether it was the bathroom or the kitchen, and the plaque said, "Only one life, 'twill soon be past, only what's done for Christ will last." And try as hard as I did to run away from that, I couldn't. And when I saw Betty in here the other day and just the obvious impact that she has had on your life, Bob, I thought of that. And I'll bet you somewhere in an attic there is a similar plaque that your mom had hanging in your house right after she fired you from Howard Johnson's restaurant as the worst employee she had ever had, she said.
Well, that was unfortunate, but
Did that really?
That was a,
Yes, it really happened.
well, it was like New
John was
Year's
making up.
football
That
game.
wasn't
My
good.
mom was a manager at Howard Johnson's
Okay.
restaurant
Yeah, I remember
when I was a
that.
kid,
OJ's.
and she called me into work, and it was like New Year's when all the football games were on. So I went in and was moping around and whining around in
Not
the
wanna do
kitchen, and she said, "You know what? Why don't you just go ahead and go home, and you don't need to bother to come back."
Oh.
Yeah.
So thanks, Mom.
that's
See
a
you at
good
home.
lesson. Yeah, it was really special to have your mom here Sunday.
Yeah.
That was really amazing. I've heard so many people and how touched they were to have. So if your mom's watching it, Betty, that was, man, what a special moment. Thank you for making the trip. Thank you, Lefty, for Bob's brother, for helping provide that. It was really a special time.
Too bad we had those technical problems right in the middle of her little speech. That was rough.
You know what? We have people call them old-fashioned parents, and something I can never get out of my psyche is when I heard my parents pray for me, and that kind of impact. If you're a parent, sometimes you don't think your kids are listening to you, paying any attention, they're driving you nuts. But there's nothing like praying for your children. It will never be forgotten, and it sticks with you, and I'm sure God helps that piece to happen.
That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's really good.
John, I think in some of the sermons that you delivered years ago, didn't you reference similar hearing? Was it your mom or your grandma?
Absolutely. She would, no, it was my mom.
Okay.
She would put us around the table knowing how painful it was going to be for me in particular, and teach us, make us sing these old hymns of the church. which even right now while I'm sitting here, they just resonate. I can
what's
hear
one,
them.
for instance, that you're hearing right now?
Man of sorrows, what a name for the Son of God who came, ruined sinners to reclaim. Bob, take it from there.
Hallelujah, what a Savior.
Got a shout.
Oh, man.
Oh, it's a good one.
That was bad.
You know, a great memory I have, though, are just the folks in the churches that you grew up in. I think you were crawling under the benches one day, and you learned about road maps, didn't you?
Yeah, that was an unfortunate comment that I made. I was crawling under the pews in Hagerstown, Maryland, in our little Assemblies of God church, and anyway, someone's legs were hanging down. I don't.
As they should be off the pew.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it was Sister Beulah. Sister Beulah.
Sister Beulah.
And I told her in my inimitable way that she had beautiful legs and such beautiful lines that ran up and down them.
Got you in trouble a little bit, huh?
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier this plaque that you saw in multiple. Are you sure it was just one? Perhaps
They were all over the house.
Yeah, good. I was just glad that was before advanced technology, or she would have had screens
Little
all over the
post-its all over the place, yeah.
Well, my non-WEAG influences were from other churches too. And if you're watching and maybe you probably have some community you're involved with, and there's some kids who don't have some of those parental figures, I can tell you that I had lots of adopted, I had my own mom and dad, but I had lots of adopted parents as well who took me in, who taught me so much. I've gone on record so many times of saying some of my greatest mentors, people who never gave up on me in the church, people like E. Robert Jordan. We called him the chief. He was a master chief in the Navy, and everyone from Pennsylvania who grew up around Calvary Baptist knew the chief, and in fact hundreds of churches that have been started, and people like me who've been influenced. And you never know whose life you're impacting just by being that parental guidance. It's really been special. And likewise, they're WEAGers, but they're two people who sitting at the table here, not you, Jim, who've been very influential.
I'll just leave.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. You've been very influential as well.
I know what you meant. Speaking of mentorship, I hear so much from people that have had the benefit of being mentored or even being able to mentor someone else. Certainly, you gentlemen, in the roles that you've had and many of the stories I've heard you tell over the years, no doubt you've been benefited by being mentored or being a mentor to somebody else. How could you speak to some of those? Maybe give an example of what that experience might have been like, someone in particular who was instrumental that way. How is that mentorship initiated? Because I think some people, when they hear about how powerful having a mentor is, maybe like nod their head like, yeah, that'd be great, but how do I find a mentor, the right one for me and so forth? So perhaps you might have some thoughts in that regards.
I'll kick it off. I had two mentors in my life. One, when I began to get serious about the Lord, I had just gotten married and had really pretty successfully escaped his clutches up until that point. And I began to think, wow, where am I headed? What's going on here? And there was a minister from New Zealand in Springfield, Missouri, young man. And Helen and I started attending his church. And he took a real special interest in people like me and would just have coffee with us and answer the difficult questions of life that we would deliberately try to trip him up with. And if he couldn't answer them, he would have a joke or something to fill in with instead. And he was just a down-to-earth person. And he taught me at that early age what it's like to be real in ministry and not plastic. And then the other one, when I graduated from seminary and came here, Bob Roden. He was already doing ministry. He had started this church. It was already thriving. And I learned so much from him about what to do and what not to do. And some of them are secrets that I'll take to my grave with me because, oh, goodness, some of the ideas he had. But anyhow,
he was a
both
good
of those
dancer,
guys.
too, by the way. I hate
Whoa,
to reveal
whoa.
A
that.
good dancer?
He was,
Okay.
yes. He still is.
Assemblies,
Excellent.
ordained Assemblies of God retired pastor. Careful. good dancer.
And he was my roommate in Cuba recently.
Okay, yeah, that's right. You guys had a trip down there.
Yeah. So we have had a great life together, and he was a big influence on me and continues to be.
The mentor relationship that you had with the gentleman from New Zealand, how did that come about, that you fell into this pattern of being able to meet with him?
Started attending his church, got really turned unto the Lord. Then Helen and I started a ministry to indigents, Springfield, Missouri. It's a sleepy little town. Back then it was. Now it's more of a city. Mm-hmm. But right on the crossroads of America, north, south, east, west. Mm-hmm. And so we had a lot of people passing through there who would sleep on the streets and that sort of thing. And this was at the beginning, and then extending into the middle of the Jesus movement. We became a part of that. And he became very interested in us because we were reaching out to that community. Okay. So he kind of made that first overture. Yeah. And then we certainly responded, and we began taking the dregs of society that we were working on with us to his church, and that's how it all started happening.
So, but you plugged in first.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what got it started. So,
absolutely.
Shane, you and I were talking about that at a recent live Q&A, and how important it is to just take that initial step of just plugging in somewhere, helping out in some volunteer role or small group, and you find those relationships develop that can really make a difference in our lives. I think so far we've talked so much more about learning from people that are perhaps older than us, other than Bob wanting to stalk little children. That's not what he meant. That's not what he meant.
Not what he meant.
I had to.
Thank you, Jim.
But I watch children, not in a weird way.
Yeah, not in a weird way.
I love kids.
Kids are awesome.
The adults
for sure.
are the
and there's definitely something from their creativity and the way they respond to the world and see the world that we can learn, right? How might you appreciate, or how have you appreciated learning things from folks that are perhaps even nearly half your age, a younger up-and-coming generation? Any of you have an example of that?
I personally not learned anything from anybody that long. Have you?
I'm racking my brain to think of something, but we're talking about millennials, right? No, I'm joking. That was a setup, by the way.
Yes, they had planned that sarcastic
we talked about
response.
that earlier, and it's really funny, especially to the both of the millennials that are watching.
The reality is you can learn. Learning from people is very important. Your entire career, and they get a bad rap. Millennials get a very bad rap. They are so creative and energetic and want to make their life matter. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And all generations that are the next generation up have a tendency to want to criticize those coming behind. You can read that in literature. Mm-hmm. You can read letters from presidents talking about generations behind them and how terrible it all was. Yeah. And the reality is every generation has something unique to offer. And I love the ideas and the passion that kids are coming up with today that want to make their life make a difference. Mm-hmm. And they're willing to take risks. And that's a little scary for people in my generation because you want them to have security. Right. But they're willing to throw caution to the wind to make their life make a difference for people. And
like we did when we were that age. Yeah. And then matured out of that. Ridiculous.
Sure? Yeah, how much did the seniors in your life learn from you?
Oh, they learned plenty. Many of them that were alive are still seeing their counselors, so let me tell you. Oh, gosh. I wanted to say one more thing about that. I joked at the beginning about this, but when I was regularly preaching here, nothing inspired me as much as during worship time in particular, in the gym services. Mm-hmm. Seeing rows of young people, at first it was a little humorous to me, like, what, they think they're at the Wailing Wall? They're all doing this, And in reality, it was a powerful way that they had discovered to just worship and to allow expression to God, that some of us were the chosen frozen and too cool to do something like that. That always inspired me, especially right before I preach. It was like, wow, these young people really love the Lord, perhaps more intensely than many of us older folks do.
Sure. Shane, as our current lead pastor, perhaps there might be some color you want to add to this as well when we consider that As a organization, as a whole, we are in essence learning from our youth the past 2 years as we take the Lift Up RVA initiative that they began, which was just a week-long thing for them, and now expanding it this summer to involve the entire church. And that's kicking off soon. So if you want to touch on this question in that regards as well.
Just as John, I'm almost 20 years behind John. There are pastors on staff almost 20 years behind me in age. So I have a similar dynamic. I came on this staff really hungry to be mentored and to learn. And we have young millennial pastors on staff who are hungry to learn and love it. Just like I have been to Bob and John, but I am learning, I think, much more than than these guys have learned from me. I mean, honestly, and maybe because of the time too. You mentioned one example. There are so many that our youth are leading the way in. I mean, our Pastor John Kelly and our youth group, if you don't know, started Lift Up RVA, an incredible effort to impact their city. And now this summer, we as a church are following suit and saying we want to be involved in this. So you guys started this, but we all want to be a part of this. And we just envision that being something that not just our church, but I hope other churches would do as well. They are, many of them, but putting a brand on it is very millennial. And we could sit back and go, oh, that's, you guys got to have everything look cool and brand. But there's something I've learned from that, which is that's a picture of unity. It's a calling. It's this clarion call to say, come serve our city with us. Let's lift up Richmond, Virginia together. And they are so brilliant at making these beautiful, creative calls to the community, and they fight for things. Just like I did 20 years ago, maybe, and they have, when you have fight in you for something and what you believe in, older people like myself around them have to respond. And I learned from our younger staff, the younger people around me. They're we joke about when I have a question about what to do on my phone, or teaching our grandparents or our parents how to use their phone or technology, but that's just a joke. I mean, if really there's such a wealth of resource at our fingertips with the young people around us. And I think WEAG, this church, really has taught me to tap into that. John is the pastor who facilitated the gym ministry. Us younger pastors were executing it, but we couldn't have done it without Bob and John saying, this is something we're going to do as a church, because no one was going to follow us.
Right. Yeah.
And they taught us to believe in and empower the young people who are serving. I said it to our bunch of step out kids. We had 70 kids in a room, our step out reunion. If you don't know, that's the beginning of our leadership development that begins in the 5th grade here at WEAG all the way through. And Pastor Lisa, our kids pastor, who is pouring into them, and I said it to them, I need to stop talking about this room as the future leadership of the church. They are the leadership of this church. They're leading. They're serving in our younger elementary, our preschoolers. Awesome. Our middle schoolers are serving in our elementary ministry. Our high schoolers are serving in our middle school ministry. Our young adults are serving in our high school ministry. And they're always looking down to raise up the generation behind them. And I think that's been instilled, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, all the way through.
Yeah. And the same group that helps you with technology helps me with mine too, but on a different level. With me, they help me find my phone.
And they remind you how you should have it with you. Yeah.
Right.
And your kids especially.
And I know the way Bob thinks. He's now going to remind me that I should not put my wallet on the engine of my car.
That's
Or
correct.
I might be months before I find it.
That would,
It stayed on the engine? Come on.
It did.
For how long?
I don't know.
It was, well,
Weeks.
you were running around the church wanting to know what happened. I've lost my wallet. Anybody seen my wallet? And if you know, with elderly people like myself, you learn how to use your wisdom and ask questions, if you ask questions right. And I said, well, John, what have you done today? He said, well, I changed my oil.
This
I
wasn't
said,
today. This was what have you done, like what did you do last week when you lost it? This was like a week.
was it a week?
Yes,
Was
sir.
it really?
Yeah, it wasn't a
well, I
month.
was asking you, what did you do?
Yeah.
Why'd
What
you
did
wait
do?
so long
let's
to
go
ask
back.
for wisdom?
Let's go back.
Pride.
Let's go back and let's retrace your steps.
Yeah.
And
So
we
you
got you
eventually
there.
found it.
We
on
found
the
it.
loss.
We found it.
Wow.
Go back.
He
go
changed
back,
his oil.
Go back to where you were.
That's right.
Yep.
Where
There we
did you
go.
fall off the
There we go.
track?
Yeah.
It's good to know.
I felt like a dipstick.
What?
Well,
and
good.
It's,
That's
and it's
perfect.
continued today.
Yes.
Yeah.
It continues. The tradition continues.
All right, well, we'll move on to another section here of questions based on leadership, but I do want to remind our viewers that are watching right now that if you have questions as well, we would love to be sure that your questions get answered. So this is your opportunity to ask Shane, John, or Bob a question that might be on your mind in regards to their experiences over many decades of learning and leadership. And speaking of those decades, as a matter of fact, John and Bob combined, you have roughly 75 years of ministry here at WEAG at the same church.
Pause for gasp.
Wow, that made me
75.
choke a little bit when I was.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, they are as old as they look on camera.
Oh, that
But
was
we love
hurtful.
it.
Jim, we're being nice to you
Yeah.
so far. I mean,
It's Shane we've been
It
picking
was
on, and
very-
now we're going to change our
Give
directive.
Shane some relief there. What would you say some of the main contributors are to being able to stay at the same church / organization for so long?
well, you talk about being fortunate. There are not many pastors that get to stay somewhere as long as we've been able to stay in ministry.
And want to stay there.
What?
That's just
Yeah.
the other side of the equation too. Want to
And
stay.
it's,
Either be
it's an
run out
amazing
or
gift
run out.
in all directions. And, you know, a lot of ministers, you know, they pick up and leave when tough times happen. And so to be able to stay and have people be as patient with you as you are in developing your ministry with them, to develop those relationships through the years is really a gift that's given to us. And rather than picking up and leaving when things get difficult, that's easy to do.
Sure. Yeah.
But to actually experience life together with a group of people for this long is a very rich, rewarding experience.
I would add that I learned this right away from Bob Roden, that there are two strategies in hiring associates. One strategy is get the youngest you can find just out of Bible school or seminary, and they won't cost the church as much, and they're going to want to leave in 3 or 4 years anyway and get their own churches. The other is pick the best people you can possibly find for the position, and then give them not just an illusion that they will own a piece of this pie, but give them a piece of the pie that is their responsibility, their opportunity to be visionary and creative with the particular slice of pie that they've gotten, and then support them in it. And I learned that from Bob, and I did my best to basically employ the same principle. And I never hired an assistant or an associate pastor that I didn't think to myself at the time, wonder if this guy or gal would ever be senior pastoral material. I bet they would, because they sure are Cracker Jacks right now. An antiquated expression that the younger people won't understand.
Cracker
Cracker
Jack.
Jacks.
Yeah.
I wonder if they still put a toy inside those.
Oh, yes, they do. I have a
There's
whole
production,
collection.
I know. There's- yeah.
I haven't had Cracker Jacks in a long time.
Me either.
So.
Last night.
Yeah, a long time when you're my age.
That type of perspective, John, is, I think you see that being very characteristic of some of the most successful for-profit businesses out there, where they have such longevity of senior leadership because they do invest in the best of the best and make sure that they're a strong fit for the culture of the organization that can sustain the challenges that
Yeah.
Bob was mentioned earlier. was any of that sort of, were there any lessons learned from the secular world in that too? Were there any guideposts there outside of the church where that sort of practice may not be as common that you can think of? And if not, that's fine.
Outside of the church?
Yeah. I'm just curious.
Things I want to say, I shouldn't say right now, so I won't. They're of a, political nature.
Yeah.
But apart from politics,
Text me. Tell me. I'll teach you how to do that.
yeah, I'm afraid Shane
He
will
finds his phone.
kick me out of the church if I share in a partisan way, and I don't want to do that. But I think there are a lot of organizations that run almost single-handedly from the top down. Mm-hmm. Their boards are yes people, and their vision is one man's. And I think that those are bad examples of how to engage employees and keep them for a long period of time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Great
Very
point.
good. Shane, I'm going to take the similar question I asked them and kind of twist it a little bit towards yourself, in that you've been at the same church now for 17 years and on staff for 13 years of them, and the lead pastor now for what, about 3-ish?
This August will be 3 years since
3 years?
the vote.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. What would you say to the same question about the main contributors being able to stay at an organization like this for so long? Anything different in your perspective with the number of years you've been here?
Yeah, I think great leadership is key. If you're working at a place, if you're not working for someone that is helping you grow, you probably don't want to stay there very long. Yeah. And I think for me, when I came here, I wasn't on staff when I came. I came as a part of the church. And so similarly to John's point, because I had this calling in my life to be involved in ministry, I probably would have never gone and invested my gifts and poured into a place that I couldn't imagine if God orchestrated it and if God did it, that I couldn't imagine that God would put me in a place where one day perhaps I would be helping lead that place. And I think when you're a leader, it's a little, can be proudful, maybe ambitious to talk about leadership. But at the same time, I think there needs to be a space for leaders to talk about this, because you have that calling in your life. And if you have that and you've known that for quite some time, you need to be in a place in an organization, business or church, that is a place with leadership that you have plenty of room to grow, that there's no ceiling. And I felt that here in this church. The mentorship that I've received here from Pastor Hershman, from Pastor Bob, from Pastor Martin, from Pastor Spivey, who's now in heaven, from Pastor Roden, who wasn't on staff at the time, who the founder of our church, but since I've been on staff, I've been able to interact with him and learn from him as well. I think that was key. And then secondly, I would say that I think it's key in your own heart. It's not just to be in the right place, but to be the right person in the right place. Most of my focus, a lot of longevity or lifelong impact is interrupted by my own ambition, by my own distraction, by my own crisis that I find myself, that I'm not learning from, and I don't have the option of staying in that position. And what I've learned from both Bob and John here and other leaders, that most of the work of lifelong impact is an individual effort between you and the Lord. And I know for those of you who don't follow God, or this may sound strange, but I've had a compass in my life that's been the truth of God. And when my life comes out of line from true north, things begin to fall apart. And I need to be in a place, to Bob's point. Both of you men have been through life crisis while you are here and while you were leading. And you did it in a way with leaders around you that picked you up. And you have to be in the right place, but you also have to be that person who surrenders yourself to the compass of God and saying, God, you've got to shape me. It's a painful process, but God has been shaping me over and over and over again. I'd get really emotional to even tell one story about it because it'd be that huge in my life, of huge turning points that happened over the last 17 years. These guys know what they are because they were part of them. But that process has to happen individually, I think, too.
Yeah.
You know, another feature of, I think, what enables or at least helps people to stay. We don't want to be enablers, but we want to enable them to meet their goals and their visions in life. And I think a key is tracing one of your sub-leaders' pilgrimage in leadership and recognizing the times at which that person should appropriately change ministries, work in maybe an entirely different area of ministry. Bob came to us as a youth pastor in a large church in Georgia, and he was hired as music director and youth pastor here at this church. And out of that then came the almost immediate acknowledgement that he couldn't do both with all of his might, and that he was so gifted in the area of music and the arts that we would be insane not to just say, go for it, man.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I didn't say Sunday that I wish I had is that so much of the growth of this church is a direct result of Bob and his amazing ability to recruit people and then to make them great, to push them forward. And that is ultimately a trickle down from a decision to let him own a particular part of the ministry here and to go for it and make the rest of us look really fantastic in our brilliant decision to have hired him.
Well, that is great insights for people that are in leadership to how to succeed.
Do you have a correction for that, Bob?
Yeah, I'm not that good, number one. But
Yes, he is.
what I wanted to say, something about leadership and longevity, especially in the context that we are in, that when you have a sense like Shane had of a calling on your life that's seeking the truth, and you're with other people that are like-minded, and they are attempting to do the same thing. That is what the beauty is about the family of God. And when you're working together with the same cause in mind, and when you're there long enough as you're growing and trying to do the same thing, you help shape each other. And your weaknesses can be strengths as you allow people to speak into your life that are people that you care about, that you lead with. When you have leaders that are leading other people that are being led by their peers, it is a very, very healthy environment that you don't ever want to leave. And that speaks to my longevity because they have all spoken into my life. Pastor Roden, I'll never forget when I met him for the first time on coming here for Thanksgiving. When I met him, I said, wow, this is the kind of guy with the kind of vision I want to be a part of. And for him to allow me to be a part of something like that has been a gift that I'll never forget, that affects my family, John's family. Matter of fact, our families got together, didn't they, in some sort of way. Many shared grandchildren, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen when you start getting together and leading.
Stuff happens.
Well, yeah, that's another
Stuff
benefit
happens.
of longevity. My daughter met his son, and neither of them had the time of day for each other growing up in our church. But when they went to college, everything clicked, and now Bob is my mother-in-law. I'm not sure what the exact...
I'm my own grandpa.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure it out.
Jim, you've done a good job managing all of this today.
Thank you.
Good job.
This has been great. We've talked a lot about so far the positive influences of leadership and so forth. And of course, you all could attest that many times a lot of growth comes out of the challenges and the unexpected and so forth. So I'd love to give our viewers just a glimpse into that as well. If there is perhaps anything that you can speak of, a particular experience that you may have encountered that you were not expecting in being a leader, that you wish somebody had forewarned you about, given you some heads up on, or that you had better preparation for? Anything like that come to mind?
I went through a divorce while I was on staff,
Okay.
and that was a big challenge.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in most situations in churches, I would not have been allowed to stay. But because of the love and care of the people that were a part of this church, they were real people. Half of the people that are listening today experienced what I experienced. I never wanted to, but it happened. But just to show you the redeeming, healing power of being a part of a family of God. Our families are all worshiping together, and it's a miraculous kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the healing that can happen through the difficult times, if you hang in there and allow other people to speak into your life in leadership, God really can make the crooked way straight.
Yeah.
And he certainly did that in my life.
Wow.
Any other thoughts, gentlemen, on?
On the other side of that
Yeah.
coin, biggest challenge, certainly one of the top couple of challenges of my ministry was working through that period of time as senior pastor, when Bob's family, especially precious to me because my daughter was married to his son, actually right at the time that all of that happened. And it was just a very difficult time, and I learned the value of taking time in decisions and allowing a multitude of counselors, in this case our elders, deacons, and other pastors, to weigh in again and again and again, weekly, to meet and pray and have discussions as to what was going on, meeting with Bob on a regular basis, and all of those dynamics turned out to be a method of dealing with a situation like this that I wasn't taught in seminary, that's for sure.
Sure, yeah.
And there were a lot of things I wasn't taught in seminary that I've learned in
Many of which
ministry.
you should stop practicing immediately.
I did. I quit. I up and quit 2 years ago, 3 years now.
I can tell you what I wish he would have told me.
Okay.
Before taking this position. I've already told him this. I remember asking him, saying, John, do you remember like anything physically happening to you once you took this position? And I only moved across the hall.
Yes.
I was already on staff. Everybody talked about what the difference would be. I knew I'd be obviously overseeing the whole church and the whole organization and the 50-plus people on staff, and I knew all of those challenges. I understood those, but I didn't understand the weight that would happen from across the hall. I thought I did. And I know why John didn't tell me, because there's no way to describe this weight. But, physically, you have panic issues, you have anxiety, you have all these physical things that you think you're doing enough things to help yourself out. I don't know, and it challenged me as a leader to think about, not to say you did something wrong, but it challenged me as a leader to say, boy, I better be preparing the future of senior leaders. If you're the one who's getting ready to take over a business, don't think that the mechanics of taking that spot are the focus. The real focus is, are you ready? And I don't think you ever can be completely ready, but you can be prepared knowing how difficult it can be. When when you train for an endurance event in athletics, and there's no way to feel a marathon or feel an Ironman or feel climbing Kili. It's like you have to
How
do
did
it.
that come up?
I don't know.
Yeah.
To get that $5 bill
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. So I think that's it's a really big part of our role, is preparing future leaders
Sure.
in trying to communicate the intangibles, but but inspiring some tangible preparation that they need for it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I tried to tell you.
You tried to tell me.
Our time is almost up, and one thing I think it's very important for us to address is perhaps those folks that are watching either live or will watch it later on demand they perhaps feel perhaps called to leadership, or they just have this passion, this desire to lead within wherever it might be, their families, their communities, their neighborhoods, their schools, their workplaces, but they perhaps don't know how to start. They might be in a situation where they feel stuck. How do I get out of my current job so that I can move into this area that I feel God is calling me to? How do I increase my knowledge so that I can move into a leadership position? From your gentleman's perspective over the years of going through many leadership changes yourselves, do you have any thoughts in that regards? How you might encourage people, even maybe some tangible steps of how they can maybe even make some momentum forward?
Training is always, I wouldn't say always, it is generally a prerequisite to assuming any position of leadership that leads to a professional place. And a lot of young people throughout my career have come in and talked about the desire to have a future in ministry, and I don't try to talk them out of it or into it. I tell them the steps, though, that they need to take that are very, very difficult and time-consuming. When Saul of Tarsus had a collision with Christ, we get the impression that immediately he was a firebrand for Jesus, spreading the gospel everywhere, but there's pretty good biblical evidence that he disappeared for 14 years and relearned all of the theology that he had learned under a different system. And then he came back, and like a whirlwind, he changed the world. Yeah. And so, honestly, one of the keys is to make sure that you properly prepare for the ministry that you are seeing perhaps years ahead that will take place if you work on your preparation. And the other thing that generally must be addressed is whether a person has the innate talent to literally make good on what he or she feels is a calling. I'm sure that many times there are people that audition to be soloists for the choir who are used in the choir but who are not soloists because they don't necessarily have the talent to be soloists. They have the talent to minister in the choir for Christ, but in a different capacity. So there's an important aha moment that you guide people to. Aha, I have the talent and the call, or aha, I better look for something else.
Training is a big part of that, but being willing to open yourself to people around you that will tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And having that kind of counsel can help guide you. If you've got the zeal in your heart, you can pretty much accomplish whatever you need to if you're willing to do the training and you're willing to sacrifice and you're willing to listen. And because in what we do in pastoring, what matters to us is making an impact on people's lives for the cause of the gospel. So being able to communicate with people and listen to people is absolutely crucial.
Sure.
And listening to the truth, letting people tell you the truth.
But
Listen, John, listen.
An interesting anecdote with Bob, though, is that sometimes you listen to the wrong voices. And Bob, when he graduated from high school, he had a music teacher or an influence, at least on his
Professor at Michigan State University.
There you go. Told Bob,
Would you
check,
like to say
check
his name
somewhere else to do some music stuff.
Yeah.
You don't have a good enough voice to pursue a degree in it. And boy, was he right.
Hey, let people tell you the truth.
Yeah.
So given what we heard earlier, Shane talks, that really resonates with being clothed in humility, like you were talking about recently as part of this Impact series.
Well,
Yeah.
and you couldn't ask for two better examples of that right here with
Indeed.
Bob and John. I have learned much from them, but probably one of the greatest things that I've ever learned is to observe their own humility in being lifelong learners, as we talked about. That's such a key thing. And, you know, I think most people, Bob, probably come to us looking for agreement rather than the wise counsel. And you can always find somebody to say, yeah, you should do that.
Right.
And you need people in your life, as Bob said, to say the truth. And if you're not humble enough to hear that, then you'll stay on the same path no matter what.
Yeah.
And it may not be the right one.
Yeah,
And those are the kind of mentors that you need to find in your life.
sure.
There are people that will want to help you develop. They will care about you. Find those. And we all need those in our life to push forward in our leadership ability.
Yeah.
But we got to be willing to look for them and to listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you know they really want the best for you. And that's critical in my life, I know.
Very good. And if you're not sure who those people are, just plug in, and
Yep.
you'll
You'll
eventually
find-
meet them, right? That's right.
And Bob's
word.
offering to mentor anyone who's watching today. If you'd like to come, just call the church office and ask for Bob.
There we go. Absolutely.
We'll put you right in
All
the
inquiries.
choir.
All inquiries. Go to
Right in the
Bob.
choir, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing this reflective trip down through your experiences and sharing how you have learned and grown through your leadership, which we have all, I mean, just tens of thousands of people have benefited from over the years. It's truly amazing. I know I personally have. And Shane, we are going to be concluding the Impact Series this coming week, correct?
That's
We'll have
correct.
another guest with us at our live next. We're back to Tuesday next week at 3 o'clock. But any hint towards what you're going to be talking about this coming Sunday that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think we're going to conclude on a life of impact that really we're going to get pretty practical in what it looks like to be willing to offer the things that are happening in your life and offer them to other people, and what it looks like for us to cultivate. You know, there's actually lots of scripture about using farming and using land and using this idea of cultivating and planting seeds, and so we're going to learn a little bit about some farming this Sunday. So that's what I'll say, and come ready to learn how to apply the things in your life that God is doing. It's one thing to say, I want God to do something in me and do something through me, but how? How do I do that? And so we're going to talk about the how.
You better be careful Sunday, because we have some farmers out there. You
Yeah,
better know what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
And have that terminology
I better
down, right?
send in your emails now of how to farm.
There we go.
A quick tutorial.
So you look forward to that this coming Sunday at 9:30 or 11:15 on site here at Weston Assembly of God or online. And again, we'll be back live for our Q&A on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. So please join us then. Thank you and have a blessed day.